Texas Hill Country, spring of 1881, the wind carried the scent of bluebonnets over the dry ridge as Xavier Jensen tightened the cinch on his saddle, the leather creaking under his hand. He had not spoken much these last few years, not since the dirt closed over his wife's coffin and the world seemed to go quiet. Love had no place out here anymore, not on his ranch, not in his chest. He had sworn it off like a man leaving drink. Some things were too dangerous to touch twice. He finished feeding the livestock and headed back toward the house, boots crunching over gravel. The porch sagged under his weight as he sat, hat tipped low over his eyes. The sun was just cresting when the distant thunder of hooves and iron wheels broke the calm. Xavier stood. A team of horses was tearing down the trail that cut across his land, dragging a black lacquered carriage behind them, the driver yanking uselessly at the reins. A wheel snapped off. The whole carriage jolted, then flipped. Wood and glass shattered. Dust flared out in a blinding cloud. Xavier was already running. By the time he reached the crash, one of the horses had broken free and bolted toward the hills. The other lay twitching, its leg twisted unnaturally. Xavier moved past it, heart pounding. A woman was crawling from the wreck, blood along her hairline, her dress torn at the shoulder. Her bonnet had flown off. She looked up, eyes wide and dazed. "Ma'am," Xavier said, crouching beside her. "Do not move, you hurt bad." She blinked at him, breathing hard. Her voice was soft but steady. "No broken bones, I think." There were children. He looked back. The carriage had cracked near in half. Two small figures were huddled beneath the frame. One of them was crying. Xavier moved fast. He reached under the broken wood and pulled the children out, two girls, no older than 5 and 7. The older clung to her sister, face streaked with dust and tears. "Are they yours?" he asked the woman. "No," she whispered, pressing a hand to her chest. "I was hired to escort them from Galveston to Abilene. Their parents, they never showed up at the station. I could not leave them alone." Xavier nodded. "What is your name?" "Nadira Fletcher," she said, her voice shaking for the first time. She pulled herself upright, wincing. "And you?" "Xavier Jensen." His name seemed to settle something in her. She looked over at the girls. "They are not hurt, are they?" "No, shaken, but not hurt." He looked her over again. "You sure about yourself?" "I will be fine," she said, though her hands trembled as she brushed her skirt clean. "What about the driver?" Xavier glanced back. The driver lay still in the dirt, dead. Nadira pressed her lips together and did not cry. He helped her stand. The girls clung to her skirts, their small faces pale. "You all are coming with me," Xavier said. "No argument, my ranch is just past that ridge. I have a doctor friend who can ride out." Nadira nodded once. As he led them back, Xavier felt the familiar ache stir in his chest, the one that told him not to care. But it was too late. He had seen the way she had crawled from the wreck and gone straight for those children, the steadiness in her voice, the fire in her eyes. He had not felt anything in so long. But now, something was starting to move again. The ranch house was plain, whitewashed, and sturdy. Nadira sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room while the doctor cleaned the cut on her temple. The girls were asleep in the next room, curled up together under a quilt. Xavier stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "You are lucky," the doctor said. "Could have cracked your skull wide open. Get some rest." When the doctor left, Xavier stepped into the room. "You need anything?" he asked. She looked up. Her dark hair was loose now, falling over one shoulder. "I cannot thank you enough," she said quietly. "You do not have to." She hesitated. "I have not known much kindness on the road out here. I was a teacher back east, thought I might try my hand at teaching frontier children. That was before I ended up with 2 girls and a wrecked carriage." "You are braver than most," Xavier said. She smiled faintly. "You are kinder than you let on." He looked at her, then away. "I lost my wife 5 years ago. She is buried under the cottonwoods behind the barn. I stopped letting folks stay here after that." Nadira's eyes softened. "Then why did you let me in?" He did not answer right away. "Saw you go after those girls before you even knew if you could stand. That told me enough." She reached out and touched his wrist. "Thank you." That small touch burned through him more than any fire had in years. The next morning, the girls followed Xavier everywhere wide-eyed, quiet but no longer afraid. Nadira helped in the kitchen, her sleeves rolled up, her hair tied back. She moved like she belonged. They stayed 3 days. On the 4th morning, Nadira stood outside beneath the cottonwoods, looking at the grave with quiet respect. Xavier joined her. She was kind, he said, his voice low. The kind of woman who made a place feel like home. She must have loved you very much, he nodded. Nadira looked up at him. You did not have to save me, you did not have to care. I did not want to, he admitted, but I could not stop myself. She stepped closer. Neither could I. He kissed her, soft at first. Her hands came up to his chest, holding him like she had known the shape of him all along. When they pulled apart, her eyes were wet. I do not want to leave, she whispered. You do not have to. He wrapped his arms around her and she leaned in. The cottonwoods swayed above them, and for the first time in 5 years, Xavier Jensen let himself believe in something again. Love, real, living love, had come crashing back into his life, and this time he was not letting it go. The henhouse door groaned as Nadira eased it shut behind her, wiping her hands on her apron. The morning sun had barely cleared the tree line, but her palms were already warm with work, the scent of straw and grain clinging to her sleeves. She paused at the fence and looked out across the fields where Xavier moved along the boundary with a coil of wire slung over his shoulder, the line of his back straight even as he stooped to mend a break in the fence. She hadn't meant to stay this long. At first she told herself it was for the girls' sake, for their safety, their comfort. But each morning she woke in the quiet house, with birdsong at the window and the low rhythm of chores settling her pulse, she found fewer reasons to leave. Xavier returned to the barn slowly, sweat darkening his shirt at the collar. He nodded to her and reached for the pump handle, drawing water into a tin basin. She waited until he'd washed the grit from his arms before speaking. Who tends this place when you're away? She asked. I don't leave often. When I do, I ride to Comfort or Fredericksburg and back same day. Harlan from the neighboring ranch keeps an eye on things if I'm held up. She rested her arms on the fence rail. I thought about traveling west, San Angelo maybe. I hear there's a need for teachers. There is, he said, but not much pay and rougher folk. You'd be treated better here. I've been treated worse, she said, her voice light but not flippant. He glanced at her, then passed her to where the girls were gathering wildflowers by the creek. You could teach here. The nearest schoolhouse is a half-day's ride. Folks might be glad to have one closer. I'd need a building, she said. I have one, he replied without hesitation. Old bunkhouse out back, roof's good, needs a chimney patch and some desks. She turned to face him fully. You'd give me that? I'd give you anything you asked for, he said, the truth of it plain in his voice. She looked down, brushing a bit of hay from her skirt. You're not used to saying things like that. No, he admitted, but I mean it. Her voice dropped. Some men say things to keep a woman from leaving. You don't strike me as the kind who'd try to trap anyone. I'm not, he said, but I am asking you to stay. He didn't touch her, just stood there, holding her with his words, his stillness. She nodded slowly. Then I'll need lumber and nails. He smiled, not with his mouth, but somewhere deep behind his eyes. They spent the next 2 days clearing the bunkhouse. Dust choked the air as they pulled down rotted shelves and stripped away the old canvas cots. Nadira found a crate of yellowed books in one corner and wiped them clean, her hands reverent over the spines. Xavier repaired the hearth, his knuckles bleeding from a slipped hammer, but he didn't curse. When she offered a strip of cloth to wrap the cut, he let her tie it without looking away. That night, she found him sitting beneath the stars with a jar of nails on one knee and a pencil behind his ear, sketching out measurements on the back of an old ledger page. You draw straight lines, she said, settling beside him. I like when things fit the way they're meant to. She traced the edge of the paper with her fingertip. Did you and your wife ever build something together? A crib, he said after a long pause. It never got used. We lost the baby before it came. He didn't flinch when he said it, but his voice was low, anchored in something old. I'm sorry, she murmured. There was no fixing it, he said. And after that, we stopped talking about what could have been. Nadira didn't reach for him, didn't offer comfort he hadn't asked for. She just sat there, her shoulder near his, letting the silence settle between them like a blanket. He turned the page and began drawing again. You think you'll keep the girls here? I don't know yet, she said. They've no one in Abilene. I wrote a letter to a cousin in Kansas who might take them, but if she doesn't reply. If she doesn't, he said slowly, they'd still have a place here. She looked at him, really looked, and this time when their eyes met, her hand found his without hesitation. You're nothing like the men I knew back east, she said. That's probably for the best. She laughed softly, then leaned her head against his arm. The night air was cool, but she felt warm down to her bones. The girls ran to them the next morning with a basket full of eggs and a piece of ribbon they'd found in the grass. Nadira braided it into the younger child's hair as Xavier hitched the wagon. They were headed into town for supplies, lumber, hinges, a few slates for writing. As they rode, Nadira watched the hills roll past, the grass high and golden. She thought of the life she'd imagined for herself, classrooms filled with strange faces, boarding houses with thin walls and cold stoves. That future felt distant now, like something she'd read in a book but never lived. Xavier didn't speak much during the ride, but when he helped her down from the wagon, his hand lingered on hers a second longer than it needed to. Inside the general store, he ordered everything she'd listed without hesitation, even the oil lamp with the etched glass shade that she hadn't expected him to notice. As they loaded the wagon, she said quietly, "You remember small things." "I remember you." She didn't answer with words. She just touched his arm and held it there, and he knew she wasn't going anywhere. Not now. Not ever. Not as long as he kept building something she could believe in nail by nail, day by day, beside him. The first rain came in late May, soft and steady, tapping against the tin roof of the bunkhouse as Nadira etched letters onto a slate for the younger girl, who sat cross-legged on the floor beside her. The older girl was practicing sums near the hearth, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. The smell of wet mesquite drifted through the open window. Xavier stepped inside, shaking droplets from his hat. His boots left prints across the plank floor as he crossed to the table and set down a wrapped parcel. "Got you something from town," he said, unwrapping it slowly. Nadira looked up from the slate. Inside the brown paper was a small brass school bell, polished until it gleamed. She reached for it and ran her thumb along the handle. "I've never had one of my own," she said. "We shared one between 3 teachers back in Boston." He leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "Figured it ought to be yours if you're gonna run a school. I can't imagine needing to raise my voice around here." Her tone was quiet, but her smile widened. "Still, I'll use it come fall," he nodded, satisfied. "I've been clearing a spot by the oak grove. Figured we'd build the desks outside first, let the girls work in the air a while before we move everything in." She rose and crossed to him, the little bell still in her hand. "You say we like this is your project too?" He met her eyes. "It is." She watched him a moment longer, then turned to hang the bell on the wall beside the door. Later that week, while the girls napped on a blanket beneath the trees, Nadira and Xavier worked side by side in the grove, fitting pine boards together with iron nails and short, careful strokes of the saw. Sweat beaded along Xavier's temples, and Nadira's apron was smudged with sap, but neither seemed to mind. "You ever build anything other than fences and cribs?" she asked, sanding a desk's edge. "Barn, smokehouse, chicken coop that collapsed after the first cold snap." "I'm better now," she laughed, low and warm. "I can tell." He picked up the next plank. "You were right about those girls. They're steadier now. I think they needed stillness more than anything." She paused. "They ask about you when you're not near." "They trust you?" He didn't answer right away, but his hands worked slower. "I wasn't sure I had anything left to give children." "You do," she said. "They feel it." Xavier set the hammer down. "Do you?" She met his gaze. "Yes." They finished the desks in silence, not from distance but ease. When the last one was carried inside the bunkhouse, they stood back and looked over the room. The slates lined the shelf, books stacked neatly on the table, the bell catching the last of the daylight. Nadira turned to him. "It's starting to feel like a place for growing things." He tilted his head. "You mean children and us," she said. He didn't speak, but he reached for her, hands rough and sure, and held her face like he was learning it by feel. She leaned into the touch, eyes half closed, and kissed him without needing to speak. That night, after the girls were asleep, they sat on the porch steps wrapped in quiet, watching lightning far off over the hills. Her hand rested over his knee, steady and light. "I've been offered a parcel of land behind the ridge," she said. "The county clerk told me if I stay and teach, they'll deed it to me for $1. He looked at her, then back to the dark horizon. "You want it?" "I want to plant something," she said. "A garden, maybe, a life," he nodded once. "There's good soil there. And water runs close." She turned her face toward him. "I want you there with me." His answer wasn't words. He drew her close, kissed her slow, and when he pulled back, he whispered, "You already have me." The wind picked up across the grasslands, but they stayed as they were, anchored under the stars, two people who had lost much and found more than they thought was left. By summer, the school was open. By autumn, the girls called her Mama. By winter, Nadira Fletcher became Nadira Jensen beneath the cottonwoods, with the creek running slow behind them and the sun shining through bare branches above. And Xavier, who once believed nothing could bloom again, held her hand through every season that followed. The first frost clung silver to the high grass when Xavier found the broken fence line near the west pasture. He didn't call for help, just set to work with a quiet steadiness that matched the morning hush. The horses had stayed put, more from habit than luck, but he still moved faster than usual, the cold biting through the knees of his work trousers. Back at the house, Nadira stood over the stove, turning cornmeal in her palm, shaping it into cakes for the pan. Her fingers moved with practiced ease, her mind elsewhere. She'd been thinking more and more about the land parcel behind the ridge. The county deed had arrived with the last post, and the papers now sat folded inside her dresser beside the worn journal she'd carried from Galveston. The girls were still sleeping. They'd stayed up late reading by lantern light, heads pressed together over a dog-eared copy of Robinson Crusoe. Nadira hadn't the heart to stop them. Their laughter had filled the cabin like a promise. Xavier returned while the sun was still low, his coat stiff with frost and his shoulders dusted with cedar needles. He didn't speak until he'd pulled his boots off by the door and washed the dirt from his hands in the basin. "Fence held through the night," he said, drying his hands on the cloth beside the window. "But I'll need another day out there. Corner posts rotted clear through." "You'll take Harlan with you this time," Nadira answered, placing the skillet on the table. "That ground's uneven, and I won't have you wrenching your back again." He raised an eyebrow. "You giving orders now?" "I'm married to this place same as you," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "If it breaks you, it breaks me too." He crossed the room and kissed her lightly on the cheek. "I'll ask Harlan." She turned, resting her hand over his. "I've been thinking about building a root cellar near the schoolhouse. If we dig it before the ground freezes, I can start preserving more come spring." "I'll draw the plans tonight," he said. "We'll dig it after the fence is secure." He didn't ask why she wanted it. He didn't need to. She'd started making plans that stretched beyond seasons, plans that wound themselves around permanence. Later that morning, Nadira walked out past the barn to the grove behind the schoolhouse. The wind stirred the brittle leaves overhead, and the light came through the branches in soft, slanted bars. She knelt and traced a shallow line in the dirt with a stick, marking the edge of what would become the cellar wall. Footsteps approached behind her light, unfamiliar. "Ma'am," she rose and turned. A boy stood at the edge of the trees, no older than 15, with a wrapped bundle under one arm and a nervous grip on the brim of his hat. "I'm looking for Xavier Jensen," he said. "They told me in town he'd be here. He's out working the fence line." I'm his wife, Nadira said. You're welcome to wait. The boy hesitated. I come from Mason. My pa passed in the spring. My ma sent me to find work, said your husband might take me on. She studied him a moment. His coat was too thin for the weather and his boots were worn raw at the toes. You eaten today? He shook his head. Then come inside, she said. You'll speak with Xavier when he returns. No sense waiting cold and hungry. After he was fed and settled on the porch with a blanket, Nadira returned to the grove, her thoughts circling. The boy was sharp-eyed and quiet-spoken. He reminded her of Xavier in small, unexpected ways, the same guarded way of carrying himself, the same instinct to look for what was broken and see how it might be mended. That evening, Xavier listened as the boy explained his situation. He didn't interrupt. When the boy finished, Xavier nodded once. You know horses? He asked. Some, the boy said. I can ride, feed, clean tack. I've helped with birthing once. You'll help Harlan in the barn, Xavier said. Mornings start before sunup. You stay respectful, you stay fed. The boy's eyes widened just slightly. Yes, sir. Name's Caleb, right? Yes, sir. Then you're welcome here, Caleb. That night, as the fire burned low, Nadira leaned against Xavier's shoulder on the porch swing. The air was dry and sharp, stars scattered thick across the sky. Caleb's soft steps creaked on the floorboards as he moved inside to bed. He'll grow into something good, she said. They all do if they're given the chance, Xavier answered. She was quiet a moment. Then, I want to start keeping books for the school, records, lessons taught, names of children who passed through. I want them remembered. He turned toward her, studying her face lit by the faint lantern glow. You think of things I never would, he said. It matters, she said. If we're building something that'll last. He reached for her hand, fingers warm against hers. Then we'll build it right. And between them, in the hush of the hill country night, something quiet and whole settled into place like a door closing softly behind them, leaving nothing undone. By the time the second winter had passed, since Nadira first stepped onto Xavier's land, the schoolhouse had changed hands and hearts alike. What began with 2 borrowed children and a broken carriage had become something deeply rooted, a rhythm of days stitched together by quiet labor, steady hands, and choices made without fanfare. The school had grown. 3 more children from surrounding homesteads now came each morning, dropped off by cart or on foot, their boots muddy and their letters crooked. Nadira kept careful records in a bound ledger Xavier had carved a cover for, its spine etched with her name and the year. She taught beneath the low-hung beams, her voice even, her expectations high, and her eyes kind. Caleb, older now by 2 winters, had settled into his role without complaint. He rose early, mucked stalls, and helped the girls with their reading in the evenings. Sometimes, he lingered near the porch after supper, asking questions about land use or how to tell a weather shift from the sky's color. Xavier answered without indulgence, only precision, which Caleb seemed to prefer. One evening, as the shadows lengthened across the pasture and the smell of wood smoke clung to the wind, Nadira sat on the porch steps with her sewing basket. She was mending one of the girls' sleeves, her needle passing in and out of the cloth with quiet purpose. Xavier came up from the lower field, his hands blackened from oil and dirt. He didn't sit right away, just watched her for a moment. You've been quiet today, he said, his voice low. She tied off the thread and set the shirt aside. I had a letter from Kansas. He lowered himself beside her, elbows resting on his knees. From her cousin, she's taken in a family of 9, says she can't take more, but she was kind about it. She paused. That makes it final. Xavier didn't answer right away. We already knew. I think I was holding on to the idea that someone else might step forward, that I wasn't deciding everything for them. You didn't, he said. You just made sure they didn't get passed around like cattle. She leaned back against the post. They'll need something more permanent than borrowed names. We can write to the clerk in Fredericksburg, he said. Change the records, make it official. She turned to face him. You do that, he met her gaze. They're ours. They've been ours. The girls came out then, barefoot and laughing, carrying a small wooden box they'd painted that morning. On the lid they'd scrawled Miss Nadira's buttons. They set it in her lap with solemn pride, then ran back inside before she could say a word. Xavier smiled faintly. That settles it. The next week he rode with her into town. The clerk's office smelled of ink and old paper, and the man behind the desk didn't blink when they signed the adoption forms. Xavier placed his hand over hers as she wrote. She didn't pull away. On the ride home, the wind was sharp, but she never raised the scarf to her face. She leaned into his side, her hand resting just above his knee, and when they reached the crest of the hill, she asked him to stop. I want to build them something here, she said, pointing to the flat stretch of land just beyond the ridge. A space of their own, maybe 2 rooms, a porch, let them grow into it. He studied the land for a long moment, then nodded. We'll start in spring. Spring came early that year. The rains were gentle, the ground soft. Xavier and Caleb laid the foundation while Nadira worked in the garden, her skirts damp with morning dew. The girls gathered wildflowers and planted their own rows of beans beside Nadira's tomatoes. The cabin rose slowly, its frame shaped by patient hands and quiet laughter. By midsummer, the porch was finished, the roof sealed, and the furniture built. The girls moved in with their books and dolls, their own beds carved by Xavier and quilted by Nadira. That night they celebrated with cornbread, roasted rabbit, and a pie sweetened with the last of the winter preserves. Caleb played fiddle by the fire, and the girls danced barefoot in the grass. After the others had gone to bed, Xavier and Nadira stood at the edge of the porch, lantern light gold behind them. I never thought I'd have this again, he said. She reached for his hand. You didn't have it before, not like this. He looked down at her. You still want that garden behind the school, she nodded. And I want to put benches under the oaks. Let the children read where it's quiet. I'll build them, he said, all of it. She smiled then, soft and sure. I never thought I'd be someone's beginning. You're mine, he said. You always were. He kissed her then, slow and certain, beneath the stars that had watched them from the start. Years passed. The schoolhouse stayed full. Caleb claimed a small parcel nearby and built a 1-room cabin with his own 2 hands. He married a woman from Bourne and added a 2nd room the following spring. The girls grew tall and steady, one drawn to music, the other to horses. They bore the Jensen name with quiet pride. Xavier's hair went silver at the temples. Nadira's hands grew lined with work and time. They still sat on the porch each evening, her head resting against his shoulder, his hand wrapped around hers. They never needed many words. Just the sound of wind in the grass, the hush of dusk settling over the land they'd built together. A life made not from chance, but choice. Not from what they'd lost, but from what they'd found in each other, in the children they claimed, in the place they made their own, and they never left it. Not once, not for anything, because love, when earned, when tended with care and time, doesn't fade, it stays. And theirs did. Forever.